cover some things when we discuss what I presented, because when you introduced myself, I was not sure whether this is a little over-promising for 30 minutes. But we'll see. We'll see. So let me quickly share my screen.
So I will give you, okay.
So you should see my screen now, right?
Yes, thank you.
Then let me arrange this a little bit so that I can see you also. This should work. Okay. So I suggest, after this nice introduction, in case you have additional questions concerning what I did in my career or what I'm doing, we can do this after the presentation. So there should be plenty of room. I was told I shouldn't talk too much, too long.
Yes.
Because I have a tendency to forget about breaks and stuff like that. So therefore, I prepared a very short one, hoping that this provides enough food for thought so that we can have an interesting discussion afterwards.
Yes, as you promised, you will let time for discussion, plenty time
Yes.
for discussion.
Yeah, there should be plenty of it.
Okay. Okay.
Unfortunately, although I have been often in Tbilisi, Mako and I met in connection with HICD, but I've never seen your university. I only saw the photos when I went to your website. I thought, quite nice. Really nice. Very modern building. Yeah.
Yeah.
The last one, I mean, I still teach at university in Switzerland, but this is also, I mean, those are modern buildings, but, you know, very functional, more boring than what I see on your photos. So next time I will be in Tbilisi, I will come to visit you there to get a better impression.
Welcome. With pleasure. We are waiting for your visit to Georgia and to our university.
So what I would like to do in this strange situation, and I followed a little bit the situation in Georgia also, the COVID situation in Georgia. I mean, you certainly are aware of the fact also that in Germany, we are not doing well right now. During summer, we had it incredibly under control. We were down to something like 150 cases per day. Meanwhile, we are close to 30,000 per day. And I learned in relation to the population, the situation in Georgia is also very bad. So I hope that you and your families haven't caught it yet and don't catch it. I have other friends in Georgia where it hit their family. And it's usually sad situations, you know, with elderly people. It's really bad. Now our focus today is on the business side. We look at what consequences does this have on organizations.
Yes.
We will do it very high level. Still, I thought what might be helpful when you think about it during your studies is I tried to come up with showing you to use a systematic framework to approach those questions. You know, so I do not have a full set of answers.
Yes.
But I thought what is much more helpful than answer, because all those answers nowadays are preliminary anyhow, you know, and probably never ever covering all the issues that we are facing. So I thought, let's go through it. Let's look at frameworks, and then from there we dig deeper. And within those frameworks, then I will come up with a few ideas also. The first thing is, which is a kind of a, I do not know your curriculum, so I can't say whether this is a repetition. If not, it's something like, it's a very quick walk through what are usual ways of looking at change and of how to think about change. So that we get in part one kind of a structured approach, how we can look at it. And then we can look at how did COVID-19 change this situation? What are organizations facing right now? And in many cases, it raises questions. You know, one can see what companies try to do, but it's very difficult to see right now what might be finally turn out to be sustainable solutions. And then part three would be a discussion.
Okay.
First thing that I would like to ask you is something what Mako already knows. It's this. So if you look at it right now, the only thing you have to do is memorize what you see. We will come back to this at the very end of the presentation. One thing that I'm very convinced of, and the more I work in those areas, the more I'm convinced of it, is what you see here. Mintzberg published this, I do not know how many years ago, but the idea is quite old. But still, I think what he says there is right, that he, as opposed to many of the change management models that were introduced at the same time, he tried to make people aware of the fact that he said change can't be managed. There are millions of things that happen when you face change. You can ignore it, people can resist it, respond to it. You can do many things, but you can't really manage it. Because he would even say something like, this is part of the very definition of change, that you cannot look into the future and you cannot think it through completely, which means you never ever will be able to define an orderly step-by-step process that you have to go through to finally arrive at desired objectives. Which does not really speak against making plans in change projects, because the plans finally tell you whether you are still heading the right direction or not. You know, they tell you when you monitor them, am I on track or not? So it does not speak against plans, but it clearly says whatever plan you make, be aware of the fact that along the way, things will change. You will have to change your plans and unforeseen things will happen. And I think many of you, I mean, already are working in jobs, and I do not know through how many projects you went, even if it was not big change projects, but just look at your own experience. At least mine is, I never encountered a project that unfolded as it was initially planned. You know, there are always things happening along the way. Meanwhile, even in consulting, you can talk about it. I mean, I'm considerably older than you are. I remember times when pitching for projects meant you had to tell clients, those are the objectives we are going to achieve. Those are the plans. It takes you 3 months. This is what it's going to cost you, and then it's done. And nobody wanted to hear, guess what? If we go into a comprehensive change process, we embark together on a journey, and nobody right now can say what is going to happen along the way. You know, this is not how decisions were made. Meanwhile, people look a little bit different at change, so its conversations are easier and more realistic. Now, even if you think that way, you somehow have to look at change and at organizations in, you could say, in an orderly way. You need models to understand what is going to happen. And there's plenty of models out there. Certainly models of different quality, but because no model per definition can cover everything that is necessary. A model can't be reality. Otherwise, you would have something that is in a scale of 1 to 1. You know, then it's not a model anymore. So the model can't cover anything. Any model loses sight of some things. And therefore, depending on what you achieve, there are models that are more appropriate for this purpose and models that are less appropriate for this purpose. Which finally means the more models you have in mind and the more criteria you have to decide which ones of those models are the ones I should use in a given situation, what will be the ones the most helpful for me, the better it is. Now, in such a short time that we have right now, we can't give a complete overview of all the major models. So I will show you very few to give an idea what is behind it when I say models, and then we use one of it, a very familiar one, to look at the COVID situation. So, frameworks or models to think about change and to think about organization. Let's start with one that we will use later also. Whoop. I guess at least some of you are familiar with it. This is the framework that McKinsey used. They developed it years ago, and it's still a framework that structures their work. And it's called the 7S framework, easy to see why. And it's basically what they do, it's divided into two areas. You know, the area above the right line is what they call like the hard stuff, and the things below the red line is what they call the soft stuff. You find many people, meanwhile, who say, okay, the soft things are the really hard ones to handle, and the hard side is the side that is much easier to handle. So hard and soft are like relative terms, but this is how they talk about it. And let's quickly go through those 7S. If you look at the definition of those bubbles you see here, you can see the first one was strategy. And a rough description of it is, it's the organization's plan for building and maintaining a competitive advantage, you know, whatever it takes to achieve this. Then what it needs is organizational structure. And you can look at organizational structure, like you could say, this is like crystallized strategy. Organizations have to be set up in a way that they can deliver on their strategic objectives in an efficient way. And this means if you have changes in strategy, you have to check, is our organizational structure still appropriate for this new strategy? So anytime you change strategy, you are in a situation that might force you to reorganize your organization also. And this is like, you are talking about all the departments and stuff like that. Then the third one is systems. I mean, they were looking for 7S. You know, when you see it's the activities and procedures people follow. Usually when you do business consulting or you work with companies, what you find under systems is to a large extent processes, business processes. And the whole methodology of business process re-engineering goes under systems. The only thing, business process is not an S. So you had to find a different term for it. Those are the hard ones. Now, in the core of it are the shared values. You might remember this here. You see the core. The one in the middle was shared values, because the values influence each and everything. On the hard side, it influenced the hard side because it influences decisions on the hard side. So in the middle is shared values, and then behind style is leadership style. My guess is nowadays, if they would develop this model nowadays, it would look a little bit different, because there's tons of research that tell us, meanwhile, that style, leadership style, management style is, let's say, not of the essence. It's there. You can't empirically catch good leadership when you look at it through style lenses. So therefore, style is an outdated term in this sense. But the idea behind it is certainly valid, because how leadership behaves and how leadership runs the organization is a very important component in change also. Then staff, clearly, I mean, you need people and you need their skills, their experiences. So this is called in general capabilities. And that's finally the 7S as one model to structure how to look at an organization. So if you look through those lenses at an organization, you know, whatever you experience in an organization somehow has to be pushed into one of those bubbles. So you can imagine then, I mean, those bubbles behind this is kind of are very broad definitions, so that it can cover the organization. And when it comes, this is how to look at organizations. Now, when it comes to change, you know, or aligning all those elements and keeping them aligned when things change, then the idea was to say, because values influence each and everything, start with your values. Now, values should be something that does not change that quickly. You know, this should evolve slowly. Nevertheless, values can change also. So, and if this is the starting point, you look at it and say, is this consistent with our strategy? And then behind the strategy question lies this structure and systems, you know, are they organized in a way that we can deliver on our strategy efficiently? So, and this leads immediately to the second question, which means then look at the hard elements. You know, these hard elements are structure, strategy, systems. And you can look at it, yes, they have to support strategy. The structure and systems have to support strategy. And obviously, structure and systems have to support each other. So it has to be aligned. Now, we already talked about it. If you have changes in strategy, then you have to check, do we have to have changes in our organization and in our systems also? Once you have done this, then you look at the soft elements. You know, do they support what we want to achieve? And you see here, this was leadership style, your staff, and the skills of your staff. So this is kind of an idea like you build the organization, the hard side, you organize it. It's a little bit like you build a machine that is supposed to deliver efficiently on a strategy. And once you have this thought through, then you populate this machine with people and with managing people, like leadership. This is probably not a way you would describe it nowadays anymore, not in that strict sense. Nevertheless, I still find it helpful. You know, it's the analogy of an organization being a machine that is populated with people is a limited one. But anyhow, no matter whether you use you look for other metaphors or other models, each model has its limitations. So you can't solve those issues completely anyhow. So, and the fourth thing then is look at that, at then following the sequence and adjust and align those elements. You easily can see, if you think that way, this takes quite some time. You know, and the bigger your organization, the more time it needs. There are similar models. Wait, let me check. There are similar models. Sorry, I was checking time because I have a tendency to forget about time. That describe change processes in similar ways. Here you see this ADGAR model, like, you know, first there is awareness. You have to understand the need, the nature of the change. Then you have to build up desire for the change to get buy-in of people. You have to know how to do this, and people have to have the skills for the new situation. And then when you implement it, you build the ability of your organization. And finally, you have to reinforce it. This also, if you follow such a process, it takes quite some time. So when you can see, they look at it a little different. Still, there is a kind of a step-by-step approach that follows a certain sequence and takes time. And here's a third one, there you see, which is similar to what I just showed you. You know, first phase is preparing for change, then managing change, then reinforcing change. And all those are phases, and you have to plan for those phases. And it really takes time. And in big change processes, what used to happen is you try to think it through. Here you see even different, another different approach again. Here you talk about readiness.
Mr. Klaus, excuse me. Can you a little enlarge your statement?
Yes. Can you see it?
Yeah.
So the only interesting thing is we do not need all the details, you know. The only interesting thing is here also you see what you see highlighted in yellow. It's readiness, transition, installation, and institutionalization. So what you see is it's rather similar. You know, all those models have an idea behind them, which is like a phase approach, and all those phases then have sub-phases and components. You have to think it through, you have to plan it. And already the planning phase in big organizations takes considerable time. This is what all those models share. Now, what I said at the beginning, I do not object planning, and I certainly do not object models to look at organizations and at change situations. You have to change along the way, you have to adapt it all the time. But now, what we experienced is in the 60s or in the 50s and 60s, if you compare this to later decades, and especially to the situation we have now, you could say 50s and 60s were situations that were rather stable in comparison what we experience right now. And one of the things that was rather stable is in the highly developed countries, organizations were facing growing markets, which meant, you know, if your markets continually grow and you grow with them, you have a lot of resources and slack in the organization. And whether you make a few mistakes is not that important because you have to the resources to cover up for it.
Yeah.
And then things became more tricky. In the 70s, it depends on your age, whether you remember this, but the first oil crisis, you know, like in Germany, all of a sudden, you weren't allowed to drive your car on Sundays to save on gas. So all of a sudden, we experienced developments that popped up suddenly. Nobody foresaw them, but they had huge influences on economy and on companies also, which what you find is like things accelerated. in one way or the other. And meanwhile, what you find is that people talk about a VUCA world. Now I even forgot what the acronym is, but it's basically, it's a fast changing, complex situation that we are in. Things are much faster. This is one thing. The other thing is it's more complex because you work on big companies and you work on a global scale. And even if you are a small company, you know, being connected via the internet, basically worldwide, gives you a completely different complexity of situations you are in than what we used to experience 40, 50, 60 years ago. So things are faster, things are more complex. We went through massive crises, like you might remember the financial crisis around the turn of the century. Then we had a financial crisis together with real estate markets, 2007, 8.
8, 9.
Yeah, 9, you know, so they were massive. So we had crisis, and I'm talking now about, let's say, our hemisphere. You know, we had massive crisis in Asia also. So we had to face this over and over again. And now in addition, what happened? And we kind of reacted as if we reacted in an unprepared way, basically, to the COVID-19 thing. Although everybody knew it would happen. You know, the US already developed crisis management programs for pandemics in 2011 and 12. They are existing. They were ready to go. Yes, but nobody used them. You know, it's like when you look at it, 2011-12 is Obama administration.
Yeah.
Nobody in the Trump administration went back to touch anything there. Like, this might be a good idea, and we do this.
Yeah, I have a question, Mr. Klaus. What was the incentive to create these programs in, for example, in 2012? What was the incentive? This was the financial crisis of 2018 and 9
Yes.
years.
I mean, this came not out of the financial crisis. This was kind of, let's say, a long ongoing process because scientists have been warning us for decades already that they said, be aware of this, you know, because we have so much travel, we have so much trade, things hop very quickly from one continent to the next one. That means there will be a time where we face pandemics again.
Due to globalization as well, yes?
Yes, nobody knew when it would happen, you know, but science was quite sure it is going to happen. And therefore, they set up those plans in the States. And besides, you had to see, we had those, I do not really know the English term. In Germany, we said like chicken flu.
Yeah,
you know,
we had.
Yes, we know. This was H1N1 or H1.
Yes, exactly. H1 something. You know,
Yes.
so this was kind of. We saw the risk of a pandemic, but we were able to control it. Ebola is the same thing. You know, it was controlled. Although at the very beginning, you know, there was incredible fear that it would spread all over the world. HIV, it's something like also, it's you could think of it as a pandemic. It took us years to develop medications that help people to survive it and to live with it. But all of this somehow was under control. You know, it never happened totally, but all those things led to, yes, some countries developed those crisis plans covering pandemics. And I know the US has one that is complete, because I remember that one of their models those plans are based on model, there are mathematical models behind it to try to understand how do things spread, or how could things spread and how fast. And one part of the model was that they said schools are super spreaders. So the first thing you have to do is close schools. Now, in Germany or in Europe, COVID somehow did not hit young people that much. And therefore, what they did not close schools. Now, meanwhile, they changed their thinking again, because what we learned is children do not show symptoms. Somehow they can handle it, but they are infected and they can spread it.
They are super spreaders.
Yeah. So then, if you think that way and come back to schools, then schools are kind of super spreaders again. But in Germany, we did, at the beginning, we closed schools, but then we reopened them, with the argument, children do not suffer that much, and they lost sight of they might spread the virus quickly. Anyhow, so we did a little detour saying, yes, from those rather stable situations, I mean, we always had change, but much slower. From those rather stable situations, we went into situations that are changing much faster and much more complex ways. And the last example that we have right now is the pandemic with COVID. Now, I'm going the wrong direction. Now, what are the new requirements for organizational change when you look at COVID? What I try to outline is very few high-level ideas along the McKinsey model, because it's provided us a simple framework how to look at it from a business perspective. Now, first thing is, if you look at strategy, usually what people did in the old days, you do market research, when you change strategy, you try to understand markets, you adapt to market, it's time consuming. In startups that are scalable in the internet, you do it a little different, you do plenty of testing. But it's basically the same, you try to understand the market. The way you do it is different from the old way. So it's a fast way of testing it. Now, COVID all of a sudden forced not all companies, but many companies to work completely differently. Like, for example, us being a consulting company, if you look at March, in March, it hit Germany. This was when Germany realized this is dangerous. The second week of March, all our projects, really all our projects were canceled. Customers did not want to have anybody not belonging to the company on their side. And the first reaction, because nothing was thought through, nobody knew what is going to happen. The first reaction was, we simply cancel everything. And that's it. Now, this changed rather quickly, but what it meant is you had to bring things online very quickly without making strategic decisions. It was the circumstances that forced you into doing this, because otherwise there was no way of doing work. So what you tried to come up to very quickly build workarounds online and started working online with companies and then learning along the way. But this is quite different from defining a strategy and following through on this strategy. And at the beginning with our company also, I have to confess, I thought, okay, let's see, this might take until the end of the year, because at the beginning it looked promising that Germany would be able to control it. This might go until the end of the year. And then we might be back to kind of normal, which was a completely misjudgment of the situation. This is going not only to last long into 2021, many of the developments we see right now, like people are more in home office and stuff, like they will last. It's not that people will only be in home office, but the percentage of people being in home office and the time people spend in home office will be more than before the COVID crisis, at least in Germany. This is quite clear. So it's not like it goes back to normal. The new normal will be different based on the experiences we have now. So, but then once you make this change, those changes, then organizations have to figure out, what do we do with our strategy? Do we have to catch up with our strategy? You know, or do we believe in this is a transition period and we go back to normal? My guess is there is no back to normal. Now, there are companies that do not face that much changes, like the business model of supermarkets does not have to change because they are allowed to stay open, and you know, so they have difficulties they have to face with logistics and all this stuff, but their business model does not really change. In our case, it's massive changes in the business models, you know. And if you look at restaurants being closed, but they are allowed to sell takeaway food. So we have a considerable number of classical restaurants that the only way to survive for them is change their business model to takeaway. And then the question is really, once I build this, go I back to be a normal restaurant, or do I change my strategy and think in future I'll be both? And will it be possible to be both in future? You know, will people be interested that much in takeaway food when they have the opportunity to sit in the restaurant again? So for each organization, this raises a tons of questions. The only thing what I try to outline is the pandemic forced organizations, not all of them, but many organizations, into changes that were not strategic changes in the sense of this is a strategic change that we thought through and that we intended to take. And now companies are in a phase that they have to make up their mind and say, does this mean we have to come up with a thought through new strategy because the new normal will be different? Now, even if they made those changes, for many companies, the structure did not change that quickly. In some cases, you had to change structure also, but in many cases, it was like, the first idea was this is transitional anyhow, and then you push additional responsibilities to people, and you hope that those people in teams, you know, somehow align themselves and manage it. But you do not think of, we really substantially have to change all our structure. This is still to come for some companies. But what you have to change is, if you send people to home office, your systems, the processes you follow, and the standards in those processes change. So the systems changed considerably for many companies. You know, and once you have this in place, the question is also, now once we have it, what are the advantages that we get out of it? What are the disadvantages? And in the future, how do we want to continue with this? Like probably trying to keep the advantages and getting rid of the disadvantages. But this is, you could think of it like right now it's in crisis mode. It still is. And this is, many things happen and you have to manage them, but you still cannot be sure that this is how the final approach will look like. And there is a point in time when management has to start to transition what happened out of sheer necessity and pressure to transition this into kind of what is the next normal for our organization. Shared values. I think what changed a lot for many companies is compassion and empathy become much more important in management. You know, if you have less contact to the people you have to manage, And then people might feel kind of neglected and lonesome, and they face tons of problems at home in some situations. Then the way to reconnect with them or to keep connection with them is being much more interested in how are things going? What is your situation? What is your situation at home also? Because it influences very much how people feel and how they can work. Imagine somebody, like one scenario, imagine a single mother with 2 kids living in a small apartment and having to do home office and taking care of the kids at the very same time. This is hugely challenging. And then you have the feeling you are left alone, nobody supports you, you know, so any help you can get is great. And then if you have the feeling, at least my boss understands it, although he cannot completely change it, and he tries to support me, this is quite important to hold things together. So I think empathy and compassion are much more important right now than they used to be. Which leads to leadership style. How do people manage? I think they have much more to do with trying to provide security for people. And this is psychological security also. And certainly management cannot achieve in doing this completely. Because what we see in Germany, meanwhile, is at the beginning of this home office work, productivity went up. For whatever reason, you know, it's like then you can work in the evening and you can arrange all. Now, productivity went up. Now you can see it's going down again in many situations. And what you can see also is people face tons of problems. The longer they have to do this, the worse the situation gets. So we have many more children like getting eczemas. I don't know the English term. You know, when you have something, you get problems with your skin because of stress. So, you know, all those things pop up right now. And then you have to take your kids to the doctor and you have to take care of it. And doctors don't work in the evening, you know, so this is during your working time and all this stuff. There is much more conflict between spouses. We can see this also. So family issue, you know, if you are stuck together very closely in a narrow room, this produces the odds that it produces problems is much higher. And this is what we experience right now. And obviously organizations, companies cannot solve this completely. But it makes quite a difference if you think, at least my boss tries to see it and tries to be as helpful as possible, or whether you experience it as my boss neglects it, you know, not interested in it. What my boss expects me is to perform. So, and then the last thing is, yes, working online requires additional skills. Not in a narrow sense for your job, because your job did not change that much, but it's different skills when you only can work with people online and you have to coordinate online. Presenting online is a little different from going into next office and talk to your colleague. You know, you have to be more structured in doing this. So it needs some additional skills, and people have to learn this also. And organizations have to support them to learn this. Now, if you look at this, so this was a very simple approach, you know, only taking the 7S and going through them and say, what do we see right now as changes? And those are changes kind of enforced by the pandemic. So they happened very quickly and there was no strategic decision behind it. Which means COVID-19 is kind of a crisis. Companies are forced into crisis mode. They have to do crisis management. But then, because some of those changes will last, you know, they have to make a decision. How do we transition from this crisis management into new normal management again? And what does this mean in organizational structure, processes, and all this stuff, what we have to do? This is the second bullet I made. COVID-19 in some cases really demanded new business models, which means all of a sudden organizations forced into a completely new way of doing things. And this finally will force them into designing new structures also. This is part of this transition that is going to follow. And the other thing is what might happen, you never know, but what might happen is maybe organizations and countries also take it more seriously to be prepared for crisis. But you never know. Maybe in 5 years it's forgotten again, and then those plans sit there, are not updated, and we do not know. But what we know right now, it's kind of a shocking situation for countries as well as for organizations. So they might take it more seriously and they might work more on organizational resilience. You certainly heard about business continuity planning, but resilience now tries to take a little bit a more comprehensive approach. And if you look at it, resilience, if you look at it is basically the ability, to see changes in the environment and to adjust to it. And one thing is you try to build capacity so that if something changes quickly in your environment, does not throw you into crisis mode. So you are better in adapting to changes. And this is not only a question of speed. This is a question of having things prepared and thought through what you can do in certain things. And things like pandemics are predictable, not predictable in the sense that you can foresee when it's going to happen. But people preached years and years and years and said, it's going to come, people. But nobody took it seriously enough. And meanwhile, it's even that far that you probably know ISO, International Standard Organization. They have tons of ISOs. And meanwhile, the idea of resilience is built into the whole family of ISOs that covers business continuity management. So they try to bring areas of business continuity management together and align it more, hoping that this builds more of business resilience than only the idea of continuity management. So this is what we are going through right now. We do not know exactly when it's going to end, and we do certainly not know how this end is going to look like. Even though we have vaccination right now, we do not know how long vaccines last. You might need a third shot or a fourth shot after a year. And we do not know whether vaccination finally will help us to outroll COVID completely. We did it with polio. We were close to having done it with measles, but it's only close to, so it can pop up anytime if we are not careful enough. And the more people we have that refuse to get vaccines, the more dangerous measles become again. And this might happen with COVID also. So therefore, we do not really know how the post-COVID situation looks. Post-COVID is probably the wrong term. When the immediate threat is lower, it probably won't be completely post-COVID. We will be in a situation where we can handle COVID and we can kind of control it. Excuse me?
I think we will depress or we will accept recession of COVID. You understand me?
No, I did not really acoustically understand it.
Yes. We will accept not post-COVID situation. We will accept recession of COVID, and this situation will be a reality.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, I personally agree on that also. I think that way also. But we'll see what's happened. So, coming back to this, what do you remember? What is it? I mean,
pineapple.
Thank you very much for the answer. I mean, it's quite obvious. It's quite obvious that this is kind of a trick question, and in a certain sense, a trick question. But
how it can be changed.
Thank you very much for the
transformed.
Yeah. So the thing, what I try to illustrate with what you see here is the following. Yeah. This is a detail of a painting from Magritte.
Yes.
And the title of the painting is Ceci n'est pas une pomme. So this is not an apple. This is kind of a painting of an apple. And what you saw was a digital representation of a photography of a painting of an apple. So it was levels away from a real apple. We tend to overlook those things very quickly. Therefore, I use it always as an example and said, now, whatever I tried to describe, I took a model as an helpful approach to look at reality, but reality is always much more complex and more comprehensive than what our models cover. So it's like a few minutes and high level anyhow, but there is a basic thing behind it. Whatever model you take to understand a situation, your model has limits and your model makes you overlook certain aspects. This is always the case. So if you want to gain more comprehensive understanding, it's good to have different models to look at situations, you know, and you certainly can come up with a different model of how to look at organizations in the COVID crisis than the 7S that I used quickly. You know, and if you use a different model, you might see different things. So you get a more rounded picture. Therefore, I always try to advocate when you are learn as many models as possible. And then your experience finally will teach you when are certain models more appropriate than others. And this closely goes together with what you want to achieve. So therefore, the kind of apple at the end and the very end of the presentation is, yes, I'm personally convinced that what I try to outline is kind of a correct description of the situation. So at least I'm convinced, yes, it is helpful in some way. But because we do not really know what is going to happen, it has a lot of caveats. And going with Magritte again, I think looking into the future is tricky. Yes. So the more models you have in your backpack, the better it is. Okay, then. Now we have time to exchange ideas, comments, whatever. You certainly have your opinions on COVID also and your experience, what happened during this crisis so far.
Thank you, Klaus, for such an interesting discussion and for to see reality. How can we evaluate the pandemic situation and how can we be somehow to be prepare for post-pandemic situation. Now, let me ask my students to be involved in discussion and to give the questions or their comments in this regard. Please. Who will be the first?
Can I ask just one question?
Sure.
Yes, please.
Yes, we listen, Tazo.
Yeah, because thank you so much. As you know, Georgia at the beginning of pandemic announced the full lockdown. Basically, it was kind of full lockdown. There was very hard restrictions and all the kind of businesses were closed. So in the beginning, I was in favor of this kind of lockdown, but now I see that most of the countries who did more easy lockdowns, I think at the moment, currently, I think that the situation is basically the same. I mean, the total number of cases. So what do you think? What option was? What you think? What option was more suitable at the moment? Because it was beginning, nobody know the results. That maybe, for example, we don't know yet the results and what will be resulted in a few months after a few months. So
yes.
As an observer, I need. It's very interesting to hear your decision as an observer.
I only can tell you what I learned recently, and if you are interested, I could send you an article that was published in Science a week ago, and those guys came up with quite an interesting approach to find out what is the effect of measures on R. You know, this value R, like the reproduction value. I do not know whether you use it in the discussions in Georgia, but basically what it tells you is, if you look at it in a simple way, it tells you if somebody is infected, how many more people is this person going to infect? And they express it in a factor which is called R. If R is 1, then one person being infected infects one more person. You know, if R is 2, it infects 2 more persons. Now, if R is below 1, it tells you the numbers go down. You know, you are on the right track. If the number is higher than R, especially a lot higher than R, you come in into a fast developing exponential curve of infections. This is what happens right now. So they came up with quite a nice approach to identify what measures have what effect on R. You know, like if you close schools, how many % does this reduce R? I have this thing, so I can send it to Mako and she can forward it if you are interested in. Yes. Because I do not remember the percentages, but I like the approach. The other thing what I learned this week is we have a physicist at a Max Planck Institute for, let's say, complex systems. And they came up with models also to calculate the spread of the virus. And I do not know how many models they tested, but basically all their models had the same result. And this result was, if you want to control it, once it is higher than R and considerably higher than R, the only thing is a very hard lockdown. So the lockdown light that we had in Germany and in other countries also during the summer basically prepared the ground for what we see right now. You know, we didn't, so those models tell us like the lockdowns that we did were not hard enough. And we better would have taken a hard lockdown then, and we would be far better off right now. So now, I mean, you can see it in the UK, and you see it in France also. Many of the countries in Europe go back to a hard lockdown. Germany also. We still have some ideas like it is Christmas, you have to allow families to meet, but even this is down to an additional 2 people that are not in your close family. So it's very, very restricted right now. We tried a lighter form of lockdown at the beginning of November, and it did not work. I'm not a virologist, so, but those are the things that I learned during the last week. And both things very clearly point to a very hard lockdown.
To your opinion, how it will be reflected on the business and on the economy, such measures like lockdown in every country and directly in the developed countries as well?
I mean, this is a much more difficult question because, I mean, now I answered Taso's questions based on out of a scientific perspective. They said, if you want to control it quickly, you need a hard lockdown. The other thing is, and those are ethical and political decisions, is if you do this, you know, and for a long time, what does this mean? You destroy the business of how many people? You know, what are the other consequences, undesired consequences of a lockdown? And finally, are those undesired consequences worse than what we want to achieve with the lockdown? This is what science cannot answer. Those are ethical and political discussions. And I do not have an answer to it either, because Germany is in an exceptional situation. In Germany, the government throws an enormous amount of money at the economy to support it, to support people. And because we are not that much in depth, we can afford it. So our depth to GDP ratio was 0.6 when the pandemic started. Now, with all the money we throw into the economy, we are now at 0.71 or something like this finally, which is far below the depth ratio of Italy, France, or other states.
Mr. Klaus, how much is depth ratio now, today?
In Germany?
Yeah, in Germany.
Yeah, it depends. Now, if you do not calculate the COVID support yet, it's 0.6. If you calculate all the COVID support into it, we will end up with 0.71 or 0.72, which is still an incredibly good.
You mean 72?
Yes.
Huge. I don't know Germany's economy and debt ratio very good, but our Georgian debt ratio is near to 60%. And
yes,
I don't.
Which is like what we had before the pandemic.
Yeah. Before the pandemic, also we are near to this ratio.
Yes, which is good. I mean, imagine Japan or Italy; they are far beyond 100.
Yeah.
You know, and France is much higher than Germany also. Spain is 100 or something like this.
I wonder what was the ways and what was the details, how the Germany forced to help their economy, what was the details, what they do, what was the government expenses, for example.
So
this
one
was
thing,
infrastructure or the other things.
One thing is that it's an instrument we have, we had in Germany for decades, which is called short work, which means the state does not want companies to lay off people.
Yeah.
And when those people cannot work, the state steps in and pays up to 73% of their salary. And the companies have to keep them, which was extremely helpful during the last crisis, because this meant once the economy started to recover, all those people were still in place. You know, it's not that companies had to hire new ones and to build know-how again. It was, they were kind of ready to go immediately. So this is what we do right now also. Huge, you know, it's huge how much they pay for.
The government subsidize this gap or?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, not the gap, but the companies can subsidize the gap. So the government pays like 73%, and the companies are free to close the gap completely. but which means companies save enormous amounts of money, and they are not obliged to close the gap. If their situation is so bad, then they say, okay, guys, we can't do it, but we can keep you on the payroll, and you have, as a family, 73% of your net income, which is much better than being unemployed.
And how the society thinks about this in Germany? This is some social steps in economy.
Yes, this is something Germany, as a whole, I would say, always has been very proud of. Like, this is solidarity in society to do this. And we did this for a long time. Now, in COVID, this was not sufficient. So what they did is, like, they directly subsidized especially small and medium companies.
Okay, yeah.
You know what they, for example, did with restaurants? They said, okay, restaurants have to shut down completely right now. So what we do is we pay them 90% of the revenue of last year's November.
Really?
Yes.
Whoa.
This in some cases means they make even more money because they do not have the cost. You know, this,
Yes.
so this was a little, this was a little overdoing. This was a little overdoing. But so what we have a combination of this short work that keeps people in employment, and in addition, we have direct support that money flows into companies. Now, every big system is not perfect. So at the beginning, for example, we had problems with like artists, musicians.
Yeah.
You know, so they were self-employed, and so they, nothing in the system provided support for them. So it took some time until government realized that and said, okay, we had good intentions, but there's a whole group of people that we simply do not cover. And now they came up with measures to support them. So it's not like the system is perfect, but the system provides enormous support right now. Therefore, Germany is in a very, let's say, special and prominent situation. You know, this is, I do not know any country that did as much as Germany. You know, and
Germany is the most powerful economy in the Europe, and I think they are most powerful on the economy side.
Who is more powerful?
Germany.
Yes.
Germany's
yeah,
economy
so.
is Germany's
Yes.
economy is the most powerful.
Yes, yeah, this is the issue, because the thing is, if you think of this like 70%, you know what I said, 0.7 ratio, because Germany is such a strong economy, the calculations say, if the economy grows again like normal, we will simply outgrow it. It does not need any raises in taxes and specific additional measures. We will outgrow it. Now, you at the beginning of the pandemic had a 60% ratio also, like Germany. But the question is, I think the Georgian economy is not as strong as the German one.
Oh,
so
this is very weak.
And
no,
therefore,
you cannot compare. You cannot compare.
yeah. But therefore, the Georgian government has probably not the means, you know, to do all this support, because they would not know how to finance this finally, because the economy will not simply outgrow it.
And we also have the this problem, a society problem. I had question that this is social project and how this society applies this project. In our country, society didn't want government to do some social steps. They don't want the government to do this, and we have these social problems also. Yes.
No, I think that, I mean, Germany has a very specific history concerning this anyhow, because after World War II, we came up with the concept of social market economy, which is which is kind of a mixture of capitalism and state interventions, defining the playground, you know, and taking care of people much more than, for example, in the United States or in the UK. So we have a long history concerning this. Now, we weakened our system considerably at the end of the 90s. So I personally think if you go 20 years back in time, our systems were even much better than what we have right now. Because all those deregulations that happened after the Reagan and Thatcher era, you know, including all the bank deregulations and stuff like that, it weakened, for example, unions. It weakened the negotiating power of blue-collar workers, which is not, you know, for society as a whole, is not good in the long run, I think.
Also, European Union, I think. It has very big influence on German economy.
Yes, certainly, yeah.
One question regarding the banks. How did the German banks reacted to these changes in economy and maybe negative perspectives, meaning that maybe they have offered to the businesses and private individuals some models of restructuring or something, and was it supported by the government or something? How was the situation in this regard?
Yes. Now, let's see, what is a quick answer to this? One thing is, in comparison to US or UK standards or Swiss standards, the German banking system is kind of weak. You know, we do not have strong international banks. German bank tried it, they failed desperately. You might have read about this. So, they kind of a little bit recover right now, but on a much, much smaller scale. So in this sense, politics watched the banking system, especially after the last financial crisis, quite closely. Still, because it's European Union and because the thinking changed, I think banks are not regulated enough anymore. Personally, I think this. And this is true for Germany also. Now, Germany has one strength in the banking system, which is, how do you call this? Like caisse mutuelle, mutual. Those are very small banks, basically. And you find them all over Germany. You know, and they do not engage in, you know, all those
like fintechs which are not regulated, you mean?
Like what?
Fintechs, not the banks. Their status is not the bank, which is not regulated by the government and so on.
No.
They are regulated, I think.
No, I'm not talking about fintechs. Sorry, no, this is like, the French term is caisse mutuelle. Wait, let me look. Let me quickly look it up. Yeah, it says here savings bank, savings and loan as but this is not mutual savings bank. It comes close to it, but it's not. Anyhow, it's a network, a huge network of very small banks across Germany, and this is much more stable, and it was not that hit by the financial crisis because they did not engage in those real estate papers. You know, they simply stay out of this business, and they do like classical, normal banking business. Still, they are hit also because interest rates are down to zero. You know, central banks pay zero interest rate, so they have difficulties to finance their business. but at least they do not run into those problems that all the bigger banks had that engaged in the businesses with derivatives. So I think this is probably not a good and comprehensive answer, but this is the best one I have. And I do not know of any specific reaction in the German banking system to COVID. I mean, the banks are used to spread the government money, you know, so it's kind of the logistical structure to be able to do this. But the banks themselves, I think there's no specific reaction. And you have to see, for a bank, it's kind of difficult. Obviously, you do not want to lose customers. On the other hand, in a situation like COVID, where it's very difficult to see in what situations are the customers I have, you know, my business customers, you are probably very reluctant to throw loans at those businesses, although they desperately need it. You know, but you might not be able to bear the risk. And therefore, it's usually like it's government money channeled through those banks.
So, come on, are you satisfied with the answer? Okay, thank you, Klaus. Any other question, dear students?
Yeah, I have one. Not maybe question. I just want to listen your opinion. We know that situation before and after coronavirus will be very, very different. Yeah? And I want to listen your opinion about organization. For example, I think that after lockdown or maybe after coronavirus, they will have to make some changes. Yes, every organization. And I think that, for example, marketing and HR departments will be most important department to make some changes because I think that HR departments knows inside the situation very well, and as well marketing departments know outside the situation and environment very well. And I think not, for example, financial departments or something like this, but most of important gonna be marketing and HR departments. And what do you think about it?
I certainly agree on HR as well as marketing will be very important. The relative importance to other departments in a company, I think, will depend very much on the situation you are in, because it's very different, you know, for companies. But those two certainly will be important because marketing is quite obvious. Companies will try to recover, so marketing is quite important. And also, if they have to make changes, then it means reskilling people. Either,
for example, I mean, for example, to introduce some new rules, maybe. I think HR and marketing will make it the best way.
Yes, might well be. Might well be. You know, because the situation of companies is so different. I think this is, it will be quite different from company to company.
But as you have already mentioned, the crisis management is transformed to change management. So the changes should be done on organizational level as well, because this might be leading to some changes into staff and their skills, how to make them familiar to the, like say, distance working. Already Klaus mentioned some home office situation also to be changed, and psychological aspects as well. So HR
situation will be very different, or we know it. Yes, that's a fact.
Yes.
Any other question?
Anyway, so we have to face a new reality.
Yes. Yeah, I have one question regarding learning system, Klaus, because in Germany, I know that educational system is much more organized. And how can you share this to make some changes in our situation for becoming a transformation into digital learning and to make some learning processes outside the institutes, outside the schools?
Sure. Frankly, I do not know. I mean, I can quickly tell you how the German school system is organized and how it works. And I can tell you about what I think are flaws in the system. This is, in comparison to Georgia, I'm not that familiar with your system, so it's very difficult for me to compare this directly. Yeah. And in addition, I always think it's kind of, in some cases, it's simply kind of unfair, because in Germany, we are all complaining, like, deteriorating infrastructure, school buildings and stuff like that, you know, and so we face those problems also. But I mean, Germany is, in comparison, a rich country. So we are complaining on a high level, you know, therefore it's difficult to compare.
Yeah.
Because, you know, if you do not have the resources in cases in school, then obviously this influences what you can do.
Yeah.
And is there still, I mean, are you interested in outlining the school system in Germany?
Not school, direct school system, it's a learning situation, how not to become generation out of the evaluations, their marks and evaluations, their knowledge.
I didn't get this, Mako. What was the thing with the evaluation?
I mean that when the learning processes is outside the auditories, so we can arrange like these lectures, but how we can arrange in a deeper sense the evaluation of the assessment of their knowledge. Okay, if there is some tips that is already done in German educational system.
No, I do not know of any large-scale things. Many schools depend on the old systems, like you have to come into school. I know this because a colleague of mine has a little daughter in school. And although schools are shut down, she had to go to school yesterday and today because she was obliged to take a test.
Okay.
You know, and you take the test in school. So many schools still operate that way.
So it's like blended learning. So somehow they're going for exams to go to school, but the study process is going like in distance way. Okay. Okay.
Yes. But I think all those right now are kind of workarounds. You know, I do not know of any large-scale implemented system.
Yeah.
So they somehow try to arrange with it, and I don't know anything at university, because the last time I graded things was before the pandemic, so I didn't face the problem. Right now, I don't have to do any.
Okay.
We do not know what they are doing.
Okay, thank you, Klaus, for such an interesting presentation, such an interesting
pleasure.
discussion, and also thanks to all my students to have questions and integrated into discussion. And as you promised, Tazo, and I think all of us will be interested to, if you send this article regarding
yes,
the,
I will send you the article.
And if you can find another, some interesting articles, what was discussed during this session, and you can forward it to us, it will be a very great opportunity for us also to expand our knowledge regarding post-pandemic situation, how to make this crisis management into change management, and what kind of change could be done directly in all spheres, in education, in healthcare, in economic, in banking systems, and so on. So
what you can do also is, so just that everybody hears it and knows what's going to come. I can forward you a McKinsey email, because today I received an email of like the top 10 or 20 articles of 2020.
Yeah.
And there were, I think, at least 3. Like, how do organizations adapt to COVID and stuff like that? I can forward you the email.
Yeah.
What everybody can do is go to the McKinsey website. You know, you can see the articles in my email.
Oh, okay.
But to be able to download them, you have to register, but registration is free.
Free.
So
Okay.
simply go there, register, and then you have access to a huge part of those McKinsey publications.
Oh, thank you very much.
And some of them, I mean, some of them are really good. I do not, let's say, I'm not that much a friend of the positions McKinsey takes usually, but still, what they publish as know-how in many cases, it's really good. It's worthwhile reading. So this might be the closest to what you just asked for.
Okay, thank you. So
Many
for
thanks,
your
Mr.
support.
Thank you.
I greatly appreciate you.
It was very interesting and very useful.
My pleasure. So enjoy the rest of your study.
Yeah, thank you very much.
You have some time to go.
Yeah.
To Christmas.
There is nothing to enjoy except lessons and except job.
So thank you once more for your participation and for your support, and I greatly appreciate what you do, what you have done already for us during the last period.
It's really my pleasure. I enjoyed this session.
I hope that COVID will be gone soon, and from the new year we can see each other not only the distance away, but also you can visit Georgia and visit Tbilisi and our university. So we are eager to see you here.
Once you come here in Georgia, please let us know.
Okay.
Yes, I will. I will inform Mako, and then.
Okay. So we will gather.
Probably then we can have a beer together.
Yeah. Okay.
I think I hope we will collect in Alterbridge University in 1 year later, maybe 1 year later.
Yeah, maybe might take some
Also is
time.
our famous philanthrope.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
So Merry Christmas and Happy New
Bye-bye.
Year and all the best, and keep yourself.
Bye.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
thank you.
Take care. Bye.